one of the key aspects that came out of this research, and I think particularly from financial institutions and their response to 2008 and the financial crisis, was building impact thresholds. And we previously talked about the need for a focus on essential outcomes. Well, once you've identified what those essential outcomes are, you can then talk about what are the impact thresholds that denote the stage, kind of a tipping point, when an impact would be intolerable on that system, and what's the range that is an acceptable level for your organization in terms of those essential outcomes. This was initially done with financial resilience, and it was originally things like liquidity levels and capital adequacy ratios. But there's no reason why this idea of impact thresholds couldn't be applied to all 5 capitals that we spoke about in a previous video.
In fact, David, I think in many ways we do, but we're not doing it very consciously. And this is also about, making conscious thought to resilience. But if I take an example at a very strategic level in climate change, we've set a target of limiting the increase in our temperature to less than 2 degrees. And the reason for that is because we believe that if we go above that, the impacts to the world will be intolerable. So that's one example. If we think about health, the way increasingly governments will manage things like COVID-19, and in fact have always managed things like flu, is through impact thresholds. We know when we have flu each year, there are cases, there are hospitalizations, and there are people who die, but it's within a level that we as society and governments feel is acceptable and tolerable. Okay, so we're using impact thresholds already. It's just that we're not saying it as such and being conscious about it. If I go back to the water company that I talked about in an earlier session, and we talked about the supply of drinkable water to householders as an essential outcome if you're a water company. To give you an example of what an impact threshold might be in that case, it could be the water company says we must be able to supply drinkable water within 24 hours to householders in whatever way we can achieve that. And we want to be able to restore our normal supply within 5 days. That's the sort of thing we're talking about, I think, when we're talking about impact thresholds.
Yeah, I totally agree again, and good examples there. I think one of the key things to point out here is it's very different when we talk about impact thresholds to when we talk about risk appetite. I think risk appetite is generally seen once we've identified the probability of consequence of a risk. We then, as an executive team in organizations, talk about what's our appetite for that risk. And it's usually quite vague in terms of things like high, medium, low. Whereas when we're talking impact thresholds, exactly as you said in those examples, it's defined and measurable, usually in terms of like number of days of downtime, or in terms of the impact that it has on people, property, environment. So much more defined and measurable than I think a risk appetite statement would be.